You see the headlines every single day, right? Strikes, standoffs, this constant drumbeat of conflict between Iran, the US, and Israel. But to really, truly get why any of this is happening, we have to look way past the last 24 hours. We need to go back decades. This is the story of how one single event basically rewired an entire nation and set it on a collision course with the West. So here's the big question that hangs over everything. After all these years, decades of sanctions, of being isolated, of just immense constant pressure, why hasn't Iran surrendered? You have to understand, this is a nation that sees itself as an ancient civilization, one that just refuses to break. And the answer, as we're about to see, isn't in what happened last week, but what happened over the last 70 years. And that one single event, the one that changes everything, is the 1979 Islamic Revolution. This wasn't just a moment that changed a government. It fundamentally rewired Iran's entire identity, its politics, and its relationship with the rest of the world, especially the United States. It's the turning point from which everything else flows. But here's the thing. To understand the revolution, we actually have to go back even further. The seeds of all that anger and anti-American feeling that just exploded in 1979, well, they were planted 26 years earlier, in what a lot of Iranians still call the original sin of their modern history. Okay, so meet Mohammad Mosaghegh. In the early 1950s, this guy was a popular, democratically elected leader who had a pretty radical idea. Iran's oil should probably belong to, well, the Iranian people, not to the British company that had been controlling it for about half a century. It was basically a declaration of economic independence, and it would have world-changing consequences. I mean, just look at the deal they had before Mossadegh stepped in. Iran, the country that literally owned the oil, was only getting 20% of the profits. A single British company was taking home the other 80%. You can imagine how that went over. This incredible imbalance was the very fuel for Mossadegh's push to take it all back. Well, the West's response was swift and it was decisive. In 1953, the CIA and Britain's MI6 basically organized a coup. Mossadegh, the elected leader, was overthrown. The Shah, a monarch who was much friendlier to Western interests, was put back on the throne. And just like that, control of the oil flowed right back to foreign companies. For a whole generation of Iranians, this wasn't just politics. It was a deep, unforgettable betrayal of their democracy by the United States. And that memory, it would simmer for decades. So, in the years after the coup, what did Iran even look like? Well, on the surface, it looked modern, secular, a key ally of the United States. But right beneath that polished veneer, a powder keg of resentment was building, and it was getting ready to explode. It was like two different countries. On one hand, in the big cities, you had this secular, Western-facing society. Women wore the latest fashions from Paris, and traditional veils were actually banned. But for most Iranians, the reality was totally different. The gap between the super-rich elite and the poor was just massive, and it kept growing. The Shah's rule was autocratic. There was no room for dissent. He controlled the media, and any kind of civil society was totally crushed. And check out this number. During the 1960s, a full 50% of all American arms exports, I mean everything sold to the entire world, went to the Shah's Iran. He wasn't just an ally. He was basically America's policeman in the Middle East, a key player in the Cold War. And this created a disconnect you just couldn't bridge. While the Shah was spending billions on fighter jets and throwing these insane, lavish parties, including one to celebrate 2,500 years of monarchy, ordinary Iranians were struggling with crippling inflation and poverty. The two Irans were really living in different worlds. So all of this discontent, all this pressure, it finally boiled over. The powder keg ignited. Let's dig into how a religious cleric, who was exiled from his own country, was able to lead one of the most consequential revolutions of the 20th century. And this was the voice of that anger. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He was this charismatic, deeply respected religious leader who had been exiled by the Shah. From thousands of miles away, he articulated the rage of millions. And he framed the struggle not just as a fight against a corrupt king, but against his powerful American backers. And this part is just fascinating. Remember, there's no social media, no internet, and the press is totally state-controlled. So how did Khomeini's message get out? Well, his sermons, which he recorded in exile in France, were smuggled into Iran on thousands and thousands of cassette tapes. They were copied and passed from hand to hand, house to house, becoming the underground media of the revolution. What Khomeini did next was, frankly, brilliant. He built this unstoppable coalition, First, he mobilized the clergy, who were deeply respected everywhere. Then he won over the Bazari, this powerful class of merchants who were really the backbone of the economy. And finally, he inspired the youth, students who were just desperate for freedom and national pride. By 1979, the streets belonged to them. The Shah fled the country, and Khomeini returned from exile to a hero's welcome. So, the revolution was a success, but the struggle was far from over. The new Islamic Republic of Iran immediately found itself in a pretty hostile world. And for the next 45 years, it would become a nation defined by its isolation and this experience of being under constant siege. The sanctions put on Iran have been some of the most comprehensive in modern history. Think about what this means. They can't easily sell their oil, which is their main source of income. International trade is choked off. Their civilian airplanes are dangerously old because they are literally blocked from getting spare parts. And for ordinary Iranians, it means getting a visa to study or work abroad is nearly impossible. This constant pressure has shaped every single aspect of life for 2 full generations. Inside Iran today, society is just deeply divided. You've got a really significant portion of the population, maybe around 40%, that still holds on to those revolutionary ideals, or is just frustrated and disillusioned with everything. But then you have a majority, especially the young people. We're talking maybe 60%, who want change. Not necessarily another violent revolution, but a gradual opening up, an engagement with the rest of the world. So who really holds the power in Iran today? Well, a key part of the answer is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It was created to protect the revolution, but is morphed into something so much bigger. It's not just a military force, it's like a parallel state that controls up to 40% of the entire economy, from construction to telecommunications. It operates with immense power and answers to only one person, the supreme leader. And all of this brings us to today. After this long, turbulent history of foreign intervention, revolution, and decades of sanctions, where does Iran go from here? The whole situation feels like a stalemate, but it's a stalemate that can't last forever. This brings us to what a lot of analysts are now calling Iran's point of no return. The Islamic Republic has absorbed unimaginable pressure, sanctions, isolation, conflict, and it hasn't collapsed. The regime has proven that it can survive pretty much anything. But that survival has come at a staggering cost, both to its people and to its own potential. And that leaves us with the final, really challenging question. When you're at a point of no return, when you've lost so much, but you refuse to surrender, what do you do next? What options are truly left on the table for Iran and for the world that has to deal with it? That is the complex reality that stems from this deep and deeply troubled history.